I'm approaching this question of why population of moderate voters would end up choosing a more extreme candidate. And my background for approaching this is as a sociologist by training, who does not study emotions or empathy, but studies ideology and beliefs and the structure of public opinion. And then in this paper, trying to look at the connection between voters' beliefs and the representation that they choose. So this is co-authored work with Min-Jae Kim from Rice University and Liam Essig, who is a graduating PhD student here at Penn State. So we're trying to address a puzzle that is probably familiar to most people in the room about the fact that we have relatively moderate voters in the sense that despite fairly extreme elite polarization in the US, that mass polarization at the level of public opinion is much less apparent in nationally representative surveys going back decades. At the level of political elites, we have parties in the US Congress that are highly polarized, and on key issues, political representatives are more ideologically rigid and extreme than even the voters in their own party, and I'll give some examples of that later. But then voters, by comparison, are more consistent partisans than they were in the past. So the parties are more ideologically cohesive coalitions than they used to be. Partisan identity is broader and more encompassing than it was decades ago. But there's much less evidence of rising extremism kind of issue by issue in public opinion. So what accounts for this mismatch between relatively moderate voters and more extreme politicians? We're trying to ask here, why might a population of partisan but relatively moderate voters end up choosing candidates who do not represent them ideologically, even when other same party options with better ideological fit are available to them? There are existing explanations or potential answers to this puzzle. For example, you could point to institutional factors like gerrymandering or the sort of the selection of voters into like party primary elections or campaign finance stuff. The consensus, as far as I can tell from my reading of the political science literature, is that even all of these factors combined still have a relatively modest impact in like explaining this extreme mismatch between politicians and voters. Also, a sort of common answer to this puzzle has been that if this is the case, then what must be happening is that voters simply don't care about ideology. They don't vote based on politicians' issue positions, that they are sort of de-emphasizing ideology. And that might be right, but what we're trying to suggest in this paper is that it's not necessarily right, that actually there is a way to understand this mismatch between voters and politicians, even if we assume that actually, rather than de-emphasizing ideology, that voters care only about ideology and that they are trying to choose representatives who best represent them ideologically. So the way that this works theoretically is, let's assume that voters want to vote for a candidate who best represents their views on the issues. But we also know that voting is a decision that is made under conditions of uncertainty. Voters have limited information and limited ability to access more information about each politician's views at the time that they are choosing between, say, available options in like a party primary situation. This could be for a number of reasons. Politicians may hide some views while broadcasting others. New issues may come up after the election. So for example, if you were voting in 2018, you would not have been basing your vote on where each candidate stood on how the US should respond to a global pandemic, but that became a very central issue after the election. So for these and other reasons, voters are likely to only have limited information about a politician's ideology at the time that they are choosing. And so consequently, they need to rely on heuristics to try to infer ideological fit with politicians. So how might they do that? Well, let's imagine we have this hypothetical Republican voter here who is choosing between two options in a party primary. One of them we can call the ideologue, the person who takes sort of ideological maximalist positions across the full range of issues. And the other option we can call the moderate, the candidate who breaks with the party on at least one notable issue, but breaks in a way that actually is likely to make him sort of more representative of even where the party's own voters stand. In this example, for someone like a John McCain type who took sort of partisan consistent positions on most issues, but pretty consistently supported a legal pathway to citizenship on immigration, a position that is relatively popular in public opinion polls, even among most Republican voters. And let's imagine that this voter here actually agrees with the moderate candidate across the full set of issues. But so if they were making a choice with complete information, and if they were only basing their vote on ideological fit, they should choose this moderate candidate that matches their views. But let's imagine a very plausible situation that in this particular campaign, this campaign is waged on 3 issues. There's a lot of discussion of abortion, guns, and immigration. These become the sort of salient issues in this campaign. And the other issues just don't come up, or the politician is able to sort of elide their positions on those issues. Now, in this case, what should the voter do? Well, based on the sort of revealed positions, if this voter maybe does care about taxes and healthcare, but they don't know at the time of choosing where each of these candidates stand, they might very reasonably infer that because the moderate candidate breaks from the party on immigration, that the moderate candidate is also likelier to break from the party on other issues. And the voter might very reasonably infer that the moderate candidate here is not going to represent them on these other issues like taxes and healthcare. They'd be wrong in this case, but it's a reasonable inference to make based on the available information. And so what we're suggesting is that in this situation, the voter might end up choosing the ideologue, even though on the issues where positions have been publicized, they know they disagree with the ideologue, and they are only basing their vote on trying to choose the candidate with the best ideological fit. So we built this kind of micro model of voting into an agent-based model, which is a computer simulation. It's a sort of computational thought experiment where we program an artificial population of voters, so no real people here. It's artificial voters with a sort of a decision-making framework that we program them to have. That sort of basically matches what I just showed. There are more technical details that I can tell you more about in like the Q&A if anyone's interested. The goal of this is not to recreate all of the complexities of real-life voting, but rather to try to explore the internal validity of our theoretical model of voting and what would logically result at the macro level if voters were acting in this way. So in the model, we have 50 politicians who begin with randomly assigned initial positions, +1 for a pro-party sort of maximalist position, or -1 for like a maverick breaking from the party position across a set of K issues. This is simulating a party primary, by the way, which is, of course, how we sort of end up with like extreme candidates on either side. And then we have 10,000 voters here who have they are ideological to varying degrees. Their opinions are correlated, like opinions are correlated in public opinion. They are sort of meant to have opinion distributions that basically match what we see in most public opinion data. The manipulation here is uncertainty, by which we mean out of the K total positions held by each politician, how many do voters have knowledge of when deciding whom to support in this simulated campaign? So the way it works is that at each time step of the model, one voter is chosen at random to update which politician they support. They observe 2 available politicians, the one that they currently support, and then one randomly chosen alternative. Each of those politicians displays their positions on H out of K total issues. So we're varying H here. If H equals K, then you know everything. You have perfect information when you're choosing who to vote for. If H is 0, you know nothing, okay? So the voter assesses both politicians' ideologies based on the available information. The voter infers each politician's ideology from their displayed positions. And then the voter tries to infer where the politician might stand on the issues where they have not revealed their position. They use a very reasonable assumption here, which is imagine like if I know that AOC is typically to the left of her party peers on almost all issues for which she has revealed her position, I can reasonably infer that she will be similarly left of her peers on some new issue. And then the voter chooses between the current and alternative options using the rule that they prefer politicians with better ideological fit. And that's all. There's nothing else going on here besides just trying to maximize ideological fit. And then finally, after all of this, the politician that lost in this matchup, they randomly copy one position from the winning politician. This is a very noisy way of ensuring that eventually, as this model runs, after a very long time, every politician ends up stumbling onto the exact same set of positions, and then we can see what those positions are and how they match up with the voters' opinions. So here are the results. As we go from the left to rightmost panels here, we are making our voters more ideologically consistent. So on the left, we have a hypothetical population of voters who actually have opinions that are totally uncorrelated with party, just as a thought experiment. They have a sort of totally nonpartisan group of voters. In the middle panel, we have voters who are moderately partisan. This looks very much like real voters who, in this case, these voters on average agree with sort of the maximalist party ideology on like about 2/3 of issues, but still there are plenty of issues where they actually disagree with the maximalist version of party ideology. And then on the right side, the voters are a bit more consistent in their views. Within each panel, as we go left to right, we are decreasing voter uncertainty, so the voters are knowing more and more information about the politicians' positions. So what we can see here is that all you need is to combine moderately strong partisan sorting in terms of voters' opinions, which we have in American public opinion, with uncertainty about the full range of politicians' positions. That is sufficient to produce politicians who are much more extreme than the voters who choose them, even with nothing else going on in this model. So I'll just very briefly, in the interest of time here, summarize. We did a sort of second and third and fourth, because we did this experiment 3 different times over multiple years. We wanted to see, like, empirically, would real voters act the way that the artificial voters in our model act? So we recruited subjects, Democrats and Republicans. Most recently in January 2025, that was like an updated version of earlier experiments. The subjects were presented with 2 hypothetical candidates from their own party. One of them being an ideological moderate who held one sort of maverick position breaking from the party, intentionally chosen to be an issue where even most voters from that party disagree with that maximalist position. For Republicans, it was background checks on gun control, which most Republican voters favor in public opinion polls. So we had the moderate candidate here take that popular position. The ideologue candidate opposed background checks on gun control. For Democrats, the maximalist candidate here favored defunding the police, which of course is not like a modal Democratic party position, but it is a sort of like maximalist application of like left ideology. So we gave each subject these 2 hypothetical candidates, no other information really, and asked them to choose. What we found was a few things. First of all, we confirmed by checking respondents' own opinions that our respondents expressed more ideological agreement with the moderate candidates on an issue-by-issue basis, and this was true for the Republican and Democratic respondents. However, they still rated the more extreme candidates as being more ideologically representative, both in general, in terms of hypothetical future issues, and on one specific future issue on which we told the respondents the politicians had not yet revealed their positions. For Democrats, it was Medicare for all. For Republicans, it was whether there should be a right to refuse service to same-sex couples, basing off of sort of like the examples of like wedding photographers refusing to provide services for same-sex couples. And then finally, we found that the respondents' inference of the extreme candidate's greater representativeness significantly drove support for that candidate in head-to-head matchups, even controlling for the respondents' own positions. So like the sort of artificial agents in our model, these respondents, even though they expressed that they disagreed with the extreme candidate on issues, they still were likelier to rate the extreme candidate as more representative, and to the extent that they did so, they were also likelier to favor that candidate in a head-to-head matchup. So the implications here are pretty pessimistic because it means that ideologically minded voters facing uncertainty will logically support candidates who are more unwaveringly partisan and extreme than they are. Which means that partisan social identities that override ideological considerations might account for the sort of empirical mismatch between voters and representatives, but it's actually not a necessary mechanism. Even absent those kinds of factors, voters might still end up choosing candidates much more extreme than them. And over time, this dynamic might drive politicians toward extremes in a game of partisan one-upsmanship. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
So perhaps while our next speaker, Mikey Pasek, sets up, we have maybe time for one question from the audience for Daniel. Oh.
So, well, I really like this. And I think this one way that this is really useful is like as a response to a narrative in my own discipline, which would predict the same outcome for a different reason, which is partisan loyalty, that people prefer loyal partisans. It's about group identity rather than ideology. And so I think this is like a really nice way of showing how you can get the same result through a different mechanism. So I think, selling it in that way would be really important. But a quick question is, I'm wondering if you've looked at the role of political knowledge in this, like whether, you have to have some level of political knowledge to make that inference, but maybe at higher levels of political knowledge, you're less likely to need to make that inference. And so do you have, I don't know if that's a conditioning.
So on the partisan loyalty point, we've been struggling for years now to figure out like how is it possible to actually disentangle these things in like the experiment. In the most recent version, we tried something. It's probably not satisfactory, but we added a line telling the respondents that both candidates are endorsed by the party and both have a history of being like loyal partisans. So we tried to make it so that we're trying to hold partisan loyalty constant and make it just this ideological difference, but it's just impossible to disentangle these things. On the point about political knowledge, we've looked at that in the simulation. We tried to create a version where the agents are heterogeneous with regard to political knowledge, and that being more knowledgeable meant that you could ascertain more positions that the politicians hold, and also do it more accurately, whereas the lower knowledge agents would make errors. This didn't change sort of the overall dynamics, although actually we haven't looked at like whether the more knowledgeable voters tended to pick more or less extreme. So actually that'd be a good sort of point for us to focus on in those results. So thank you.